I'm tasked with taking the last 15 minutes or so to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and we've called it Mythbusters. So basically what this is a way of arming you guys as the champions against the common misperceptions or ideas that are out there that would prevent people from wanting to use VIBIT or the order set or optimized glycemic management at your sites. So basically what I'm doing is I'm pre-preparing you with some evidence, literature, and witty comebacks that you can use as your arsenal to help promote change and sustain it at your site. So one of the things that we have encountered is that providers believe that this is just the latest fad and that it's going to pass, and basically if you just put yourself under a rock and close your eyes, it'll pass you by and you won't even have to learn it. I think I addressed this earlier in the day, but since at least 2003 to present, there have never been recommendations for sliding scale insulin use in the inpatient management, and there have been always recommendations for multiple daily injections or VIBIT. So I think we can safely say that this isn't just a passing fad, and that we're going to have to commit to learning and using this in practice. This is an excerpt from a publication by an author, Perez, in 2007, which looked at, well, you can see the title here, Sliding Scale Insulin Use, Myth or Insanity. And I have this excerpt here looking at the literature. So they did, at the time, a Medline search from 1966 to 2003, looking for evidence regarding sliding scale insulin. And at the time, there were 52 publications, none of which showed a benefit of sliding scale insulin in improving glycemic control or clinical outcome. Zero, none, since 1966 onwards. So I think it's safe to say that this is clearly better practice, and it's good for our patients, and obviously something we have to commit to. So the next thing that comes up is they say, okay, VIBIT is all well and good, I like it, it's great, but it's just not relevant for my patients. It's relevant for your patients, it's relevant for your patients, but it's not relevant for my patients. So we get this commonly from care providers who care for people who rapidly transition. So perhaps the surgical post-operative management people. We get it commonly from people who say, well, my population is made up of predominantly frail elderly patients, and clearly I shouldn't have to commit to this target that you're telling me because my patients are different and unique. I'm here to argue that VIBIT is actually better to individualize these doses. So if you take the example of a 40 kilogram patient, if you go with their 0.3 units per kilogram per day as their total daily dose, that total daily dose is going to be 12 units. 6 units of basal and 2 units of bolus TID with meals. It's not going to be overwhelming for that frail patient, and in fact is going to help benefit them in terms of reducing the morbidity and mortality associated with hyperglycemia. We have a nice poster that Lita has developed looking at the outcomes of hyperglycemia in the frail elderly and the increase in dehydration, urinary tract infections, urinary incontinence, patient comfort, infections, etc., associated with hyperglycemia. And so we don't want to turn a blind eye to those individuals just because they may be elderly or more frail. The other interesting thing is within the hospitalist group in Calgary, we frequently got the feedback that it wasn't applicable because they had predominantly a frail elderly population, and that actually prompted the site to do their own audit of their own patients to determine exactly to what degree that was true, and they were able to find that even though the perception that the majority of their patients were these frail elderly population, often the patients that they were assuming were frail didn't truly meet the criteria for being frail, and so we were kind of undertreating that population unintentionally, of course, but it increased buy-in within that group to look at what their own population looked like. The argument that targets should be looser, so i.e., and it came up in my group in the early afternoon, that 5 to 12 target for the elderly population or the frail population. Certainly sometimes that does need to be the case. And the 5 to 12 is absolutely adequate for people who have hypoglycemia unawareness, or who have a truly guarded prognosis, where we don't have to be kind of as strict with those targets. That said, a pre-meal blood glucose of 10 millimoles per liter is quite reasonable for the majority of our patients in hospital, and it's something that we can accomplish using BIBIT. So if we can, we'd like to try to achieve those targets of 5 to 10, recognizing that there are a select few patients who do better with a blood glucose target of 5 to 12. So the next myth, hyperglycemia is okay as long as it's only in the short term. It's just a little while, so if we can just get them to discharge and squeak them out the door, then it'll be okay. We know that patients who are acute and may only need temporary insulin, we know that those people do have hyperglycemia, and that hyperglycemia can be associated with worse prognosis and outcomes. And I have a series of conditions here, and the associated publication that shows worse outcome, even transiently, with those hyperglycemic readings. So worse outcomes in stroke, COPD exacerbations, community-acquired pneumonia, trauma, acute coronary syndrome, and together with that, coronary artery bypass grafting, stem cell transplantation, nosocomial infections. I dare you to name a condition, and I probably can find a piece of literature to support that hyperglycemia makes that condition worse in hospital, even in the short term. So I encourage you not to turn a blind eye to those high blood sugars and to just act. And we were talking in my group earlier as well, even if you use insulin for a short 24-hour period to get them back on track, they're going to do so much better when they get home or before you transition them back to their home medications. So as we've touched on a number of times today, there's the idea around hypoglycemia and concern that BIBIT may increase hypoglycemia because you're giving insulin at different times of the day, you're giving basal insulin, and what we know from randomized control trials is that those two, that RABBIT-2 trial and the RABBIT-2 surgery trial, there was an ever so slight increase in the blood glucoses in that 3.5 to 4 range, but no increase in hypoglycemia that was more significant than that in the published literature. And we know from our early adopter sites that there was no increase in hypoglycemia at Chinook Regional Hospital in Lethbridge, and no increased hypoglycemia within the Calgary Hospitalist GO project as well. So we have some nice, strong literature looking at and outcomes in terms of data, looking at our own order set and the results from that showing that we are not going to be increasing the risk of hypoglycemia with the doses that we propose starting in our order set. There's a concern that the basal insulin will cause hypoglycemia, and I mentioned earlier about the increased frequency of off-the-cuff tests done by the bedside nurses overnight as we transitioned to this initially in Calgary. And then as they got more comfortable with the idea that this wasn't going to drop the patient's blood glucose too low, then they slowly pared that back again. Based on normal physiology, if dosed correctly, that basal insulin should not cause hypoglycemia. And if you're worried about that, start with conservative dosing and do maybe a middle of the night check to make sure that that's not happening, to convince yourself and to enable yourself to gain the confidence you need with the order set to be able to prescribe comfortably. Because everyone, when they're starting out with this, has that feeling of uneasiness, like, I'm not sure if this is going to be okay or not. So go with the more conservative dose and check. Look back on that patient, see how they did. Reassure yourself that this is safe and reasonable and that you're doing great things for your patients. And give yourself a pat on the back when it works well. If it doesn't work and a hypoglycemic episode happens, go back to that patient and say, what happened around that time? Was it because of something that was truly a problem with the dosing, or was there something unexpected that came up? Was the patient not eating? Was there some unplanned activity? Was there something else that was unplanned with the timing? Try to get to the root, be a detective and try to get to the root of that cause. Oftentimes, we find in endocrinology that there was a cause, a kind of a foreseeable cause that within the system that caused or contributed to that hypoglycemic episode. And so, if there's that reason, then you may want to reduce the dose, or you may choose to leave it as is, hoping that that circumstance doesn't arise again. We've had feedback both ways on the order set. One is that the insulin correction dose is too high, even if you start at the lowest insulin resistance one, and conversely, that the insulin correction dose is not aggressive enough, and that just shows people's practice variation and the scope of everyone's comfort and practice. So we went in our groups together through this kind of scientific basis of how we came to arrive at these correction scales. They're based on a blood glucose target of 8, which is kind of in the middle of our target range, and then based on the patient's proposed insulin sensitivity. It's an estimate, but it's a safe estimate, and it's a starting place. So you can adjust those up or down as you see fit or as needed by the patient, and you also have the option of overriding and writing your own custom one on the form if need be. But in our experience, the ones that are on the form are typically quite adequate and may require adjustment, but work well and are safe for the patients. There's feedback about BIBIT protocols not giving good instructions to nursing in the event of hypoglycemia, and I know there was some discussion in the groups today about differences between the Covenant and AHS policies around hypoglycemia. What I want to touch on is, regardless of whether it's a 15 gram or a 21 gram treatment for hypoglycemia, the main thing is to do that treatment, wait your 15 minutes, retest, make sure the patients come back into the target range. As I addressed with my group, the biggest concern in Calgary is never 15 versus 21 grams. It's more 15 grams plus the 5 sugar packets, plus the toast, plus the jam, plus the honey that goes on top of it whenever a patient has a slightly low blood glucose. And we don't want that to be the case. So follow whatever hypoglycemia treatment protocol your site currently follows, commit to it, and know that that's going to align. You know, eventually, as we said, provincially, hopefully we'll have a uniform standard, but until that time, those few grams difference between the Covenant and AHS policies is not going to be the thing that alters a patient's course at the end of the day. This has been something that we've addressed frequently, so order set usability. This concern comes up regardless of whether this is a computer-based form or a paper-based form, and regardless of whether it's a Covenant form or an AHS form. And what we want is for people to become comfortable with their form, to know the contents of the form, and to know that the protocol underlying it, no matter what format it's in, is identical, really. The content is identical and the purpose is identical. So we've had feedback that it's cumbersome to use. We've had feedback, well, the nurses don't put a weight in, so I can't calculate the total daily dose because I don't have a weight. My feedback for that is to look at the patient, make an educated guess as to the weight if need be, ask the patient what their weight is if they're able to answer for you, and use that as a surrogate. Because we are estimating the total daily dose based on the patient's characteristics, if the number's off by a kilogram, that's okay. We're taking a starting run at these doses anyway, right? So in the interim, while you don't have a formal weight, take your best guess or the patient's estimate and start with your starting dose and go from there. As we saw when we did our total daily dose calculation and we divided things up and we got 6.7 units as our bolus dose, you know, whether you choose 6 or you choose 7, that's okay. It's a bit of a judgment call. And so with the weight, it's the same thing. You want to get something as close to the truth as possible and start with that. The calculations being too difficult to complicate or too complicated to calculate, I think we went through it nicely within our groups. The math isn't super difficult. Once you get the hang of it, it kind of flows nicely onto the order set itself. And we've had the feedback that once you've used the order set a few times, that initial feeling of feeling overwhelmed when you look at it goes away quite quickly because you know where you have to check and what boxes you have to fill in. It's all conveniently located, and once you've done it a few times, the process of order completion with the order set is really quite straightforward. And then the insulins have now been updated on the order set as per the formulary. So these weren't necessarily myths, but they're hopefully things that we're continually trying to address and improve upon. And as I said many times, if you have feedback around the order set itself, direct them to your site so that we can hopefully incorporate that feedback and move along. So around transitions, and this has come up a few times, not wanting to change the routine from the community. And my response to that is neither do we. As long as it's safe and reasonable for you to continue to do what they're doing at home, then please continue that in hospital, so long as they're continuing to meet their blood glucose targets. If there's difficulty around the decision of whether or not people are going to use BIBIT all the way past discharge, or whether you're going to be transitioning onto something different prior to their discharge to hospital. And this is one of these things that unfortunately is very specific to the patient circumstance, very specific to their hospitalization. And we've tried a couple of times in the past to come up with a nice flow diagram of if this, then that, and if this, then that. And it turns into this ginormous beast of a flow diagram that doesn't actually contribute anything useful to you as the end user. So we're working on a tool right now that will help to guide those transitions, at least in their general principles, and kind of go from there. But know that none of this protocol is going to replace your own common sense and your own thinking either. So you have to continue to put that thought into how are you going to transition that patient out of hospital, starting from the moment they set foot inside the hospital. So planning for their discharge starting quite early on, so that if they do have to go home or out on insulin, we can set those wheels in motion and get the supports in place that they need early on. There's concern in some places that long-term care or home care can't do 4 times daily blood glucose testing. We've investigated that somewhat, and it's surprising to know that more places do support it now than we even knew about. So if that's a concern, and I didn't hear that amongst anyone today, so I'm not sure if this is a concern locally or not, but if there is that belief, do investigate with your long-term care providers or those transition coordinators to see what is possible. And at least in Calgary, we have a circumstance where patients will await a long-term care bed for a very long time prior to actually transitioning to that place. So we do recommend using BIBIT in the meantime, which allows for good control while the patient is remaining in hospital. And you can do some shuffling of patients' medication as needed to try to get the regimen down to 3 times daily if that helps. So we've had the feedback or the myth that it's not practical as an outpatient, or it's difficult to convert their home regimen to BIBIT and difficult to convert BIBIT back to a reasonable home regimen for discharge. I've kind of addressed this already, but then the counterpoint to that is to say it's kind of the same problem for sliding scales as it is for BIBIT, in the sense that it was inappropriate before for us to use a sliding scale until the moment of discharge and then take it away and whisk the patient out the door and wish them well. And similarly, it's inappropriate for us to do that with BIBIT. So we're hoping that, again, the cognitive process of planning for that patient's discharge starting from early in their admission will help to make more reasonable transitions to home. We want you to try to resume home meds as soon as it's safe and reasonable to do so, and intensify the home treatment if able as a management plan. Have that diabetes educator who so graciously offered to see more patients in consult in our earlier group. Have them come and see the patients early if they're going to be discharged on insulin, so the patient can get familiar with it and practice prior to discharge. And if they don't require full BIBIT at discharge, perhaps basal alone or basal and bolus insulin is reasonable as well. So trying to get that education underway as early as possible is important. The myth around variable intake. So, I'm really concerned. I don't want to use BIBIT because my patient's not eating very well and I'd prefer to use a sliding scale. We actually argue that BIBIT is a better match for those patients because we're better able to divide out the meal dose from the correction dose, and you can actually hold the meal bolus dose if the patient's truly not going to be eating, or we can adjust that bolus dose if the intake is low. So we can reduce that bolus dose by 25 to 50% with a provider order, depending on their appetite. And it's certainly safer than sliding scale based on physiology, and you can hold that if they're not planning on eating. Just to touch on carbohydrate counting again, that is mainly to encourage patient involvement and patient self-adjustment of insulin if that's the way they manage their insulin currently at home. It's a support for the patient. It's interesting information for the patients to know about the carbohydrate content of their meals, but certainly is not the expectation of the inpatient care team to be the people who are responsible for adjusting those doses based on the carbohydrate content of meals. So when we talk about the NPO and variable intake, if you take a 70 kilogram patient with poor appetite and their current blood sugar is 14.4, if you go through the BIBIT protocol, this patient will get at 0.3 units per kilo per day, they'll get 21 units total of insulin. 10 units of that would be basal, and then that leaves 3 or 4 units TID with meals, which again you could reduce 25 to 50% if the appetite is poor. So that's 1 or 2 units TID with meals plus your correction. If this patient's blood sugar is 14.4, with the correction scale being as it is, their total meal dose would be 3 units. Our pre-populated sliding scales that exist in Calgary would give this patient at least 6, if not 10 units of insulin with their variable intake. And so you can see 3 units versus 6 or 10, we're giving double or triple the dose with that uncustomized sliding scale, which is quite dangerous for the patient.
I was going to pull it up, but I think you can see here what's on the website. And just at the top, that's a screenshot. So if you go to education on the bibit.ca website, it pulls up a number of resources, including an educational resource for prescribers, and newly added today based on feedback from some of our early adopter sites is a self-directed learning module for nurses on how to bibit. So that's there for your use. There's pocket cards that are there. There's a pamphlet, there's posters, there's a number of things on the websites. I'd encourage you to look there. Also for, oops, can't hold on to all these things. Do you mind holding on to that, Trevor? Mm-hmm. So we created a resource binder for your site, and I'll leave a number of these with Trevor. And so there's numerous resources in here. Many of them are on the BIBIT website. And for those guests that are joining us from the Edmonton Quality Council and from the post-secondary institutions, Shondell will have one for you outside as well. The pocket cards, I think most of the prescribers got one, but if anybody didn't get a pocket card, again, I'm going to leave a number of these with Trevor, and he can distribute them through your steering committee to the appropriate people. So there's a different card for prescribers, and there's also one for nursing and interpreting the sliding scale, or sorry, interpreting the BIBIT order set. Sorry. I'm going to blame that on not being well. There's a pamphlet we've put in this is on the BIBIT website as well, but there's a number of them outside the door. It's actually a summary of what basal bolus insulin therapy is. This is actually for prescribers, not for patients. So if you want to pick up one or a couple of these, there's actually quite a few, but again, I'll leave them with Trevor. And I'd also invite you, if you think there's resources that are missing that would be beneficial, we have 2 clinical practice leads supporting us, and we have the ability to develop resources that we can share provincially. That's how we ended up with a self-directed nursing module for BIBIT. We're also going to develop a nursing module, basic diabetes education, basic inpatient management, so not exclusively BIBIT, but other things, including oral medications, complications, and our goal is to put that on My Learning Link, or the equivalent at Covenant is Click. And so again, from suggestions from people like yourselves, that's certainly welcome.